Imagine that you are General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied forces. You have a master plan, a cautious, coordinated, and logistics-driven advance in which all the armies move forward along a single, secure line. Everything is planned on paper, signed, and officially stamped. But there is a problem. One of your generals simply ignores the schedule. While the Allied High Command was still debating whether it was safe to cross a certain river line, George Patton was already on the other side, sending a sarcastic radio message saying, "I've already taken the city. Do you want me to give it back or what?" Patton was always one step ahead of the Allied plan for one simple reason. He considered command bureaucracy more dangerous than German bullets. To him, time was the most precious resource in war. While headquarters in London was processing intelligence reports that were already 24 hours out of date, Patton was on the ground, smelling opportunity. This created a bizarre situation. The Allied command often found out where its own troops were by listening to the news on the radio, rather than through official channels. Patton deliberately created fates accomplice. He advanced so far and so fast that Eisenhower's original plan became irrelevant. There was no point in ordering Patton to stop. His army was already too far ahead to pull back. The official Allied strategy was the broad front. The idea was to advance like a steamroller, slowly and without leaving gaps. Patton thought this was a waste of time and lives. He believed in the spearhead. In his view, if you punched through the enemy at one point and raced into their rear, the rest of the German army would collapse out of fear. It was a clash of two worlds, Eisenhower's diplomatic caution versus Patton's unrestrained aggressiveness. And this is where the mystery begins. How did he manage to predict that the path was clear even before official scouts gave the green light? How was he always ahead of a plan he was supposedly meant to be following? In this video, we will understand that Patton was not just a fast general. He was a master at manipulating the system. We will see how he used his own intelligence network and how his rivalry with other generals, such as the British Montgomery, pushed him to break every rule to arrive first. Patton was not just fighting to defeat Germany, he was fighting to beat the Allied command's own clock. To stay ahead of the official plan, you need data that the establishment does not have yet. While most Allied generals relied on G2, the Army's intelligence service, which compiled slow reports based on aerial photos and interrogations, Patton created his own nervous system, the Mobile Information Army. Patton knew that the bureaucracy in London was overly cautious. If a report said there was heavy German resistance in a village, Allied headquarters would order a halt for bombing. Patton doubted it. He sent his own scouts, known as the Lucky Scouts, who were light, fast reconnaissance teams operating in jeeps and light M5 Stuart tanks. The secret was the distance between the person who saw the enemy and the person who made the decision. In the standard Allied system, information moved up from the captain to the colonel, then to the brigadier general, until it reached headquarters, where it was analyzed and sent back down as an order. This took hours, sometimes days. Patton eliminated the middlemen. He often positioned himself at the most forward command post possible, sometimes even ahead of his own artillery. When a lucky scout saw that the so-called heavy resistance was actually just two broken-down tanks and soldiers retreating, Patton gave the attack order immediately over voice radio, without complex coding or bureaucracy. While generals in London were looking at maps that were 24 hours out of date, Patton was looking at the terrain through binoculars. He understood that war is fluid. If he spotted a gap in the German flank at 10 in the morning, he went through it at 10:15. Eisenhower's official plan would only be updated to reflect that gap at 10 in the morning the next day. That 24-hour difference was what allowed Patton to always be ahead. He was not predicting the future. He was simply operating in the present, while the rest of the Allied command was still reading the past. For Patton, the risk of being ambushed by acting quickly was smaller than the risk of giving the Germans time to reorganize. He used to say that a decent plan executed now is better than a perfect plan tomorrow. His field intelligence was based on audacity. He forced the enemy to react to him, not the other way around. This drove planners in London crazy because they lost control over the movement of the pieces on the board. If you want to understand why Patton was always ahead of the plan, you need to understand his rivalry with the British General Bernard Montgomery. During the invasion of Sicily in 1943, the official Allied plan Operation Husky was clear. Montgomery and the British Eighth Army would be the hammer, advancing along the eastern coast to seize the strategic city of Messina. Patton and the American Seventh Army would be only the shield protecting the British flank. To Patton, this plan was an insult. He refused to be Montgomery's supporting actor. So he did what he would do for the rest of the war. He interpreted the orders in a way that allowed him to run faster than the plan itself. While Montgomery advanced slowly against heavy German defenses around Mount Etna, following London's cautious timetable, Patton saw an opening. He did not ask permission from General Alexander, his immediate superior. Instead, he ordered a lightning advance toward Palermo on the other side of the island, and then swung his forces toward Messina. Allied planners were horrified. Patton was stretching his supply lines to the limit and ignoring the geographic objective assigned to him. But Patton understood something the bureaucrats did not. Prestige is a weapon. If the Americans reached Messina before the British, the balance of power inside the Allied command would change forever. Patton forced his soldiers to march day and night, under scorching heat, across mountainous terrain that manuals claimed was impassable for tanks. When Montgomery finally reached the outskirts of Messina, expecting to enter the city in triumph, he found something that was not in the plan. Patton's scouts were already there, drinking coffee and waiting for him. Patton had arrived first. By doing so, he shattered the carefully crafted British plan and proved to Eisenhower that American aggressiveness was more effective than British caution. What do we learn from this? That Patton used speed to create a fait accompli. Once he captured a city he was not supposed to take, the Allied command could not simply punish him. They had to adapt the entire war plan to the new reality Patton had created on the ground. He was ahead of the plan because he forced the plan to chase him. In modern war, fuel is the blood of armored divisions. If you do not have gasoline, your tank is just a piece of iron sitting still. The Allied High Command used control of fuel as a leash to keep generals under control. If Eisenhower wanted Patton to stop so that Montgomery could advance, he simply cut the supply quotas of the Third Army. But Patton was a master of what he called creative logistics. To stay one step ahead of the plan, he developed methods that bordered on insubordination to make sure his tanks never ran dry. Patton created special acquisition units. When truck convoys from the Red Ball Express, the massive Allied supply line, passed near Third Army zones, Patton's officers, sometimes even the general himself, would divert those convoys. They swapped road signs or simply convinced the drivers that the fuel was urgent for Patton's front. He also implemented a policy of living off the land, not food, but technology. He offered rewards to units that captured German fuel depots intact. Instead of waiting for fuel coming from Normandy, Patton advanced expecting to find the enemy's fuel. It was an extremely high-risk gamble. If he did not find German gasoline, his entire army would be isolated and vulnerable. And why did this keep him ahead of the plan? Because Eisenhower based his plans on official logistical capacity. Headquarters would say, Patton only has fuel for 50 kilometers, so he will stop there. But because Patton was stealing and capturing extra supplies, he could advance 150 kilometers. When the Allied command realized that he had not stopped where he was supposed to, the logistical crisis was already in full swing. Eisenhower was forced to send more supplies to Patton in order to keep the Third Army from being surrounded, pulling resources away from other sectors. Patton essentially hijacked Allied logistics to serve his own speed. Patton used to tell his supply officers, "My army can eat its belts, but my tanks need gasoline." He understood that logistics was not an insurmountable physical barrier, but an administrative one. By breaking administrative rules, he was able to break through the physical barriers that paralyzed other generals. If you want to stay ahead of a plan, you need to prevent the people who wrote the plan from talking to you. Patton was a master at using tactical silence as a weapon of insubordination. There were countless occasions when Eisenhower or Bradley tried to contact Patton's headquarters to order a strategic pause, only to be told that communications were unstable or that the general was unavailable at the front. In reality, Patton was often turning off the radio or simply ignoring messages. He knew that if he received a direct order from a superior to stop, he would have to obey or face a court-martial. But if he did not receive the order in time, he could keep advancing and later apologize by claiming that the victory had been too fast for the radio to keep up. While other generals waited for intelligence confirmation over the radio about enemy strength, Patton relied on his tactical intuition. He had an almost supernatural ability to look at a map or at the horizon and identify the breaking point, the Schwerpunkt. He did not wait for the Allied plan to say the enemy was weak. He tested that weakness personally. He pushed his armored units forward in thin, fast-moving columns. If they encountered resistance, he did not stop to plan an encirclement. He simply ordered them to bypass the resistance and keep driving into the enemy's rear. This created a curious phenomenon. Patton advanced so far that he literally drove off the map of the High Command. The tactical maps used at Supreme Headquarters had geographic limits based on what they believed would be the maximum advance for the week. Patton often crossed those borders in 24 hours. When Eisenhower's liaison officers arrived to deliver new orders, they discovered that Patton's command post had already changed location 3 times that same day. He was always one step ahead because he moved at a physical speed that the bureaucracy of communication simply could not track. That autonomy was dangerous. By operating outside the radio network and outside the plan, Patton often left his flanks completely exposed. If the Germans had had reserves available for a counterattack, the Third Army could have been annihilated. But Patton gambled that his speed would create so much panic in the enemy that they would be too busy running to think about attacking. He was not just ahead of the Allied plan, he was ahead of the enemy's ability to react. Being constantly ahead of the Allied plan came at a cost, and that cost was paid in frayed nerves by Generals Eisenhower and Bradley. The problem with having a general who advances too fast is that he destabilizes the entire front. War is not a 100-meter sprint, it is a set of gears. When one cog Patton spins 10 times faster than the others, the machine risks blowing apart. Many times, Patton's frenetic advance created what strategists call a logistical vacuum. He pushed so far forward that he forced Eisenhower to divert resources from armies that were following the plan, such as Montgomery's, to cover the gap Patton left behind. This generated enormous diplomatic crises. The British accused the Americans of being undisciplined cowboys, and Patton responded by saying the British were too slow to win the war. To Eisenhower, Patton was a necessary problem. He was the man who delivered victories when no one else could, but he was also the man who nearly caused the collapse of tire and ammunition supplies across the entire continent because he simply would not stop moving. There were moments when the Allied High Command had to issue forced halt orders just to allow the infantry and the fuel to catch up with Patton's tanks. On one such occasion, Patton became so furious that he suggested his men cross the Rhine River by swimming, if necessary, just to avoid giving the Germans time to catch their breath. Beyond logistics, there was the tactical risk. By always being out front, Patton frequently operated beyond the reach of Allied air support. If the Germans had managed to isolate the tip of Patton's spearhead, there would have been no way to rescue it in time. But for Patton, the greatest price of speed was not the risk of death. It was the risk of being stopped by politics. He knew that if he slowed down, the Allied plan would turn him into just another general waiting in line. He used speed as political armor. As long as he was capturing territory and taking cities, it would be impossible for Eisenhower to fire him or stop him without looking foolish in front of American public opinion. In the end, George Patton was not ahead of the Allied plan by accident or by luck. He was ahead because he understood a truth that the bureaucrats in London and Washington often forgot. Plans are made for men, not men for plans. Patton knew that war is a living, changing thing. To him, waiting for a confirmed order was giving the enemy the one thing they could not be allowed to have: time. By stealing fuel, turning off the radio, and ignoring the borders of official maps, Patton was not just being insubordinate. He was applying the science of speed to shorten the war. He was the right man at the wrong moment for diplomacy, but at exactly the right moment for victory. His ability to always stay one step ahead proved that, on the battlefield, audacity often matters more than perfect logistics. While other generals were trying to manage the war, Patton was busy ending it. The lesson is clear. Discipline is essential, but the ability to break the system in order to seize a unique opportunity is what separates administrators from the great leaders of history. And what about you? Was Patton a genius who saved thousands of lives by accelerating the end of the war, or a dangerous egotist who put everything at risk for personal glory? Leave your opinion in the comments. I want to see the debate catch fire.